Good evening. I am Katie Soo, and I'm so excited to be joining you tonight. I am the co-chair of Asia Society Southern California. I am also on Asia Society's Board of Trustees and an early member in shepherding the ALL program and bringing it to life. Today, we are going to actually dive into a discussion about Asian women entrepreneurs and investors and celebrate their impact on innovation and the tech community at large. We have four distinguished leaders from this space, and I'm very, very excited to introduce you to them and talk about their personal journeys, their unique views on technological innovation, and more importantly, the future of venture. Our first panelist is Sandra Oh Lin. She is the founder and CEO of KiwiCo, a hands-on learning experience for kids. Holly Liu was the co-founder of Kabam, which was acquired for $800 million, and she is now an active early-stage investor. Kat Mañalac is the head of outreach at Y Combinator, and Pocket Sun is the co-founder and managing partner at SoGal Ventures, the first women-led next-generation venture capital firm. So excited to have everyone here. Let's dive into the discussion. So first question, this goes to Sandra. You studied engineering and you got your MBA and had a series of jobs leading CPG and e-com companies. Then as a mother of young children, you decided to strike out on your own and start what is now KiwiCo. Why then? And did you always expect that you would become a founder and an entrepreneur?
So to answer the latter question first, I did not expect to be a founder and entrepreneur. It was not something that I set out to be. I know that there are a number of people who do that, and I respect that and admire that greatly, but that was not necessarily something that I had put out there as a life goal. But it turned out that I did end up founding and starting KiwiCo. And now when I reflect on it, I actually think it was the business that I was meant to start. And the reason that I say that is you had mentioned kind of career-wise, and in terms of my education, yes, I'm an engineer by training, and I started my career at Procter & Gamble, so know consumer products really well, R&D. And then more recently was in the tech e-commerce space. So PayPal, eBay, was a GM of eBay Fashion. But it also stems, I think, from my interests and kind of who I was growing up too. And so as a student, did a lot of project-based learning when I was really young. In high school, my family actually had a kiosk in the mall. And so we were kind of an entrepreneurial bunch. And so we sold troll dolls at a kiosk, and I got to name the kiosk Wonderland. And we would take the excess inventory and take it to the Butler County Fairgrounds, the flea market in Ohio, where I grew up. And so I think that there are parts of that journey that I kind of have with me today. And I also have very fond memories of making with my mom too. And so she was kind of a MacGyver of sorts, and this dates me, but way back when McDonald's would have styrofoam containers and we would turn those into handbags and that type of thing. And so as my children were turning kind of 3 and 5, my oldest two, I really wanted them to get hands-on. And the idea was maybe partially to celebrate some of the time that I had with my parents and with my mom, but also part of it is I wanted them to exercise their creativity, and I wanted them to feel like they could make things and basically bring things to life. And that is where it all started. Come to find out, there are a lot of busy, well-intentioned parents like me who want a similar type of set of activities for their kids. And that's where it all came from.
That's awesome. And I know many panelists here actually are subscribers of KiwiCo or will be. So my next question goes to Holly. So you two also started out in the corporate and tech worlds. What motivated you to co-found the gaming startup Kabam? And what did you learn being a leader and being a woman leader at what became an eventual unicorn and prompted your shift to venture capital?
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. I think working at a large company, which probably Sandra and I could relate to, is that you're able to produce a lot. So I was a product designer at a company called AOL. I say a company called AOL because I don't even know if it's still around, but it literally brought all of America online. And I loved it so much. I got to work on the community products, the security products, the safety and security products. And the thing about a large company, which anybody who's worked at any company, is that you start realizing that your audience is like the execs. Like you're constantly in meetings for other meetings. Like there was always a meeting for a pre-meeting to get to you're laughing, Katie, because you know that was always that. And I think what had happened was, you know, ever since I was younger, I too love to create. I'm actually a subscriber of KiwiCo. We have a lot of those boxes, and very similar to Sandra. And even in product design, you're sitting there doing a lot of designing, and I just realized that I didn't design kind of thrives off of feedback, or like any type of creation, right? When you create a company or something, you need feedback. How are you going to learn, or how are you going to make it better? And it was just hard when it was just, you know, the managers, and you're just moving up this chain. So I remember in 2006, the landscape had really changed for startups. We had a huge .com crash in the Bay Area, so it was pretty scary in many ways, and it was just coming back out. There was a concept called Web 2. I know now we're on to Web 3, but it was just the beginning of Web 2, and I just remember this so clearly. In 2006, I remember Chad Hurley and Steve Chen, and I know that because Steve Chen was Asian, like they got on YouTube and they're like, we sold to Google for $1 billion. And like me and my co-founders were like, whoa. And we hadn't even started yet. But I remember thinking like, well, maybe now it's time to do a startup. There's just all these things. And I don't even think I knew what I was doing, really. I was just thinking, oh, finally I could do a project where like people who weren't executives, like I can give it to the open, and that people could see. It didn't have to go through these lists of approvals. And so that's how I ended up kind of even thinking about starting and going into entrepreneurship. And I didn't even think I was doing that. I was just like, oh, this seems like fun initially. It's my CEO is like, you know, this isn't just a project, Holly. You know that we have a fiduciary responsibility to make some money back for our shareholders. I go, oh, okay, that makes more sense. So I think like that whole journey of Kabam and just learning just so much more of what entrepreneurship is than just building. I think at the heart and core of it is building, but there's also this whole thing of building something that people want, which is a motto of YC, is make something that people want. And that's that second half of just what I've learned. And now as an investor, being able to put not only all of that to work, but being able to fund these other founders, particularly female founders, and being able to bring those things into life is just really amazing.
That's actually a really prominent theme, I think, throughout most of the panelists here, is investing back in the community, investing in founders and female-led companies. So this brings me to Kat. So you were drawn to tech from your early days at Wired Magazine, and you were the chief of staff for one of the founders of Reddit. How did arriving in Silicon Valley and working for YCOM impact your identity as a professional woman, and how did it shape your career mission?
Yeah, I didn't know I was going to ever work in tech. I started out in journalism and film, and you know, I would not have predicted that I would have, you know, been at YC for 8 years. But essentially what happened was I'd always been interested in the intersection between technology and culture. I grew up in the Bay Area, so I think from a very young age, and you know, we were all into gaming, and we were around a lot of, you know, Web 2, you know, 1.0 companies growing up. And so I started working at Wired, which is sort of back then, and this was like 2007, 2008. It was very much the intersection of technology and culture, and covered what was next. And that's where I really fell in love with startups. I met, you know, the founders of early Kickstarter and early Airbnb, and they were moving so quickly and so passionate about solving these big problems. And so that's when, you know, I, you know, started working after that with the founder of Reddit, Alexis Ohanian, on his fund and nonprofit. And from him, I learned, you know, Reddit is one of the biggest communities on the internet in the world now. And from him, I learned a lot about online community building and what it takes to help early stage startups get started. And that's, I think, where I got really interested in the possibility of moving in that direction. I started at YC in 2013. And prior to that, there was this narrative that Silicon Valley was a meritocracy, right? If you work hard enough, if you're smart, you know, then everything will happen for you. But I think being immersed in this, and the, you know, conversations really started around women founders and women not getting, a fair shake in Silicon Valley around the same time that I started at YC. So maybe 2014, 2013. And I really started to look at the numbers, and, there were so few women getting funded. There were also, I thought, not enough women starting companies. And so I became really interested in figuring out how do we get more women to apply to YC? How do we get more women funded, not only at the earlier stages, but at the later stages as well? How do we, get more women, young women, to think about starting startups? And so, I've been at YC for 8 years now, and we have seen some movement in the right direction, and at least conversations are being had, but there's so much more work to be done. And I'm really excited to see, a lot of women on this panel who are doing work in this space to get more women funded and to get more women to start companies.
Yeah, this is a really key topic that I think a lot of us have talked about in the past. And, Pocket has actually been doing so much of this. This is like, from the get-go, you've been an entrepreneur, you first founded a nonprofit and then a venture capital firm, and your focus has always been predominantly in tech and women in Asia and the US. So maybe take us through how you've been thinking about SoCal Ventures and what you're hoping to achieve over time.
Yeah, so I started my entrepreneurial journey in Southern California, and the name has something to do with SoCal as well. And so I started when I was at grad school. I was studying entrepreneurship and innovation, and that was the first time I, one, fell in love with startups, and two, realized that I was always one of the only women, the only young woman, the only young Asian woman at any given room. So that really, I guess, made me confused. Like, is this a men's world? Do I even belong here? So with that question and the entrepreneurial spirit I was learning in the classroom, I decided to start SoCal first as a community to bring young women together and show them role models out there, and success stories could happen. And that's where I met Kat for the very first time. So with our events like going really well, I realized that there is product market fit. There needs to be something and someone supporting women entrepreneurs. And back in 2015, the stat was like 2.2% of venture capital goes to women entrepreneurs. And it has gone up and down, and now it's back at the same level as we were in 2015, which is kind of sad. Although all of these, progress and movements and new women GPs are emerging in the VC landscape. So there's still a lot of work to be done. But what we were able to achieve is quite cool. We started in LA as one student-led organization to now we have over 50 chapters around the world on 6 continents. So that's under our nonprofit. And in 2017, we were able to launch our first VC fund. We raised money from over 90 LPs around the world. And we were able to put together about $15 million to invest in women and diverse entrepreneurs in the very early stage. And 4 years later, our first 2 investments out of the fund have become unicorns, and there are more unicorns in the making in the portfolio as well. So we're really proving with performance that investing in women yields awesome returns, and it's a great business to be in. And it's really awesome to see that there are more and more emerging diverse VCs getting into the space, but of course there's never enough. So a big part of what I and SoCal still do today is building the pipeline on both the women investor side and the women entrepreneur side. So with the VC fund plus nonprofit model, we're able to do a lot for the ecosystem.
I love that. I think that there's something so powerful about being able to be funded by women, started and founded by women, and then led by women. There's just like a really nice
closed loop.
Yeah, like an ecosystem there, right? So the next question is a little bit more personal, just now knowing a bit more about your journey, your career. And I think, Holly, you had noted this too, the first half of your life was really about being an outsider, as an Asian woman growing up in America. And then the second half of the journey is really about being a woman in the workplace, And this question is for all of you. Just how did that shape your identity, your sense of belonging, and just how you have approached your career decisions? Has it impacted you and your opportunity to succeed? And I'll start with Holly.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So as you kind of alluded to, I feel like I've lived my life in almost like two halves. I grew up in a town called Palmdale, California. A lot of people have never heard of it. I was very much the only East Asian woman or East Asian person. They just didn't see a lot of me. So oftentimes I would get asked, "What are you? No, what are you really?" So much so that I probably never embraced like calling myself Chinese American till very recently, because to me, it was very clear that I wasn't, if they kept asking me, I definitely wasn't one of them. And in my mind, in full disclosure, I thought American meant white. And so it was a very, very kind of stark world. And I kind of lived my life there, really very much just thinking, just dealing a lot with just being Asian. And then exacerbating that is just the role models in media. I was talking about it and I was really thinking about it. I said, in the 80s, we only had maybe 2 Asians on screen, and it was men. It was Long Duck Dong from 16 Candles and Data from Goonies. I can't remember his name, from the Temple of Doom. He was on there. And it probably wasn't until, definitely Karate Kid 2 was the first time I saw an Asian female woman. And it wasn't like, and when it was really in my face was Janet Yang's movie, Joy Luck Club.
Joy Luck Club.
Yeah, that was like, to me, I was like, oh my gosh. And it's funny enough, I was in Palmdale. I went to go see it with my parents. And my parents are Chinese immigrants. They came via Taiwan. And it's so funny because when I watch that movie, of course, I'm the kid. I relate the most to my kids. And I asked my parents, I said, "Oh, who'd you relate with the most?" And I was sure going to think the parents and everything, because they had that same journey of going from China to Taiwan and just all these stories. And they said they related the most with the kids too. And I was like, what? This whole time. But we just didn't have a way to really discuss it, right? Because there just wasn't, media just does provide that cultural kind of like lightning rod of being able to kind of relate and not be in your own bubble. And then it's kind of funny because as I grew and ended up founding a company, all of my founders were Chinese American, but I was the only woman. And for the longest time, I just thought, oh yeah, I'm just like, people would ask me what it's like to be a female founder. And I'm like, I don't know. It's just like being a founder. I don't know. And it wasn't until the company grew bigger and things became more nuanced. And I just realized, why am I the only one around the table? Or why is it that, my 360 feedback has comments about how I dress and how I look, when like, this is a gaming company where like pants are optional in the president's studio, like the studio's president is like walking around in flip-flops. I'm like, why do I get commentary around that? And I think, and then as more women started talking to one another, I realized, you know what, we're not really alone. And I think things like what you and Janet are doing is really kind of pulling us together and really kind of giving us space for the first time of saying like, oh yeah, when I am living in this crossroads all the time because I can't turn off being Asian and I can't turn off being a woman, like, where do I go? I always joke around being like, I feel like I'm the rarest animal of all. Like, I have the bamboo ceiling and the glass ceiling. We're like pandas in the zoo, just trapped and everybody admiring us. So I just think like there's a very like what AW is doing here is really important and very special in providing space. And then once we can come together and create that community, there's just so much more power that we can do.
Yeah, I agree. And I also think, you bring up such an interesting point of representation. And having grown up in tech myself and spent some years in entertainment, I would say that a lot of that shapes culture and how we see ourselves. And so the reason why this panel is so exciting for me is you've got founders who have exited, you've got venture and people who seek female founders and invest in them. We need more of this to create the movement so that we can allow for more women to actually dream bigger, and actually believe that they can do exactly what each of you are doing or have done. And so maybe going to Kat, how how has that sense of identity and belonging shaped your world? Obviously, you spoke a lot about how it affects the way you think about recruiting and sourcing for YCOM, but on a personal level, like how's that affected your journey?
Yeah, I'm actually an immigrant. I moved to the Bay Area from the Philippines when I was just about 2.5 or 3. And so as similar to Holly, I feel like for most of my life, I identified as an immigrant. Like I didn't even really think about myself as a woman, right? I was like everything. I remember in 3rd grade, this kid came up to me and was like, "You can never be president." And I was just so angry. Like I was like, "You can't tell me what I can't do." But then, it's technically true, but yes, and similar to Holly, for whatever reason, and I think media plays a big role in my mind, you know, American was white. I just wanted to be this like athletic white girl, who was that was like the ideal in my like elementary school, and I didn't see any other sort of examples of like what I could be or what I could achieve, and so I think I had this chip on my shoulder, and I think I always felt like I had to work harder to prove that I should be here in this country, in the room, and I think that's really, when I look back at it a couple years ago, I'm like, this might have been what has propelled me for quite some time. And then, when I started working in Silicon Valley, I suddenly realized I'm also a woman, and what that means, as Pocket said, we're often the only women in the room or one of the very few women in the room. And so as I think about helping founders and and recruiting founders, as you said, I've really thought hard about where do we find more women and how do we support them as they start and grow companies. And yeah, that's been a big passion of mine. But yes, I'm really also excited by the community that you're building here, because I wish that this was something that had existed when I was earlier in my career, because I think it makes you feel less alone in the journey.
Yeah, and I will tell you on a personal level, the challenges is, I think I realized this, joining as co-chair of Asia Society Southern California and then meeting with all of you. I just realized that instead of waiting for something like this to start, as women, like you just have to start it yourself, because there is no one sort of coming to say, I'll help you. I'll figure this out. So we just did it. And I think, to hear that validated and to actually be able to create that community, I think is super important. So handing it off to Sandra for a second, you are in it, like you are actually on the founder path and the journey. You are a CEO and founder today of a company, nevertheless, that is impacting the lives and learning and development of children of tomorrow. And so greatly inspired by your journey. How has identity and the sense of belonging shaped that and impacted how you think about, just in general, being a founder and CEO today?
Yeah, maybe some very similar themes as what Holly and Kat have said. In fact, Kat, your whole thing about having a chip on your shoulder, I think that is so true. I think you end up in a place, like I mentioned, I grew up in Ohio, Southwestern Ohio, not a lot of Asian people. I'm also an immigrant. So I came to the States from Korea when I was a young child, when I was a baby. And there weren't a lot of people like me when I was growing up. And I do think there's that element of sometimes being underestimating and wanting to prove people may be wrong. And so I think there's an investor who actually said chips on shoulders puts chips in pockets. And so I do think that there's something about that. So I don't know. I'm with you in terms of like that actually has probably helped drive me to a certain extent, just kind of wanting to say, well, okay, I'll show you, right? Like I'll show you what I can do. I think the other thing for me, probably kind of growing up, is I just had a heightened sense of awareness of being different, and my family being different. And I think hopefully that's allowed me to be kind of empathetic to others. I think I have this like heightened sense of like fairness and being treated equally too. And I also always felt this like sense of responsibility too, because, I would go to the grocery store, I'd come back, and then somebody would tell me like, so-and-so saw you because I stuck out and I'm like, oh my gosh, what did I do something at the grocery store? Like what? So that's something that has definitely kind of sat on my shoulders too, I think, kind of throughout, is kind of that notion of to a certain extent needing to represent. Maybe that's fair, that maybe that's not fair, but I would say that that is something that I kind of grew up with. And I mean, certainly heard a lot of different things said to me. A lot of people question my ethnicity kind of growing up, but I think it's also just made me tough too, to that, and kind of realizing what's out there. And hopefully, of course, would love to see these things change, but there's also kind of, it's allowed me to kind of understand kind of the way certain things are, and then hopefully be able to look at that and think of ways to build upon it. So, I mean, similar type of thing. I think that this is an incredible group, and I think that what you're doing with Oz is really inspiring. And even this conversation in and of itself, I'm like listening to Holly and Pocket and Cat. I'm like, oh, this is fantastic. So I really appreciate this. And hopefully this is going to be helpful to other people too.
Yeah. And so actually it's a great transition to Pocket, because you have been, like I said, like at the center of this since the very, very beginning. There's a massive global footprint in what it is that you do. How has your personal journey shaped the way that you approach investing and finding female founders? And do you see, actually for you, maybe an additional question to this, do you see changes that we are all trying to drive incrementally positively impacting that funding gap over time?
Yeah, so I have a different upbringing story from the rest of the panel, because I grew up in China until I was 18, and I came to the US for college alone, and no one in my family had ever been to the US. And so I was completely just coming into a new place. So for me, when I was in college, I had to really detach myself from my Asian identity to connect and open myself up to the US, what it had to offer, the colorful everything, like the culture, the people, and things that are so different. I remember being mocked at because I didn't know like Star Wars or Super Bowl. And I remember just feeling like I don't understand people's jokes, and I don't know how to sound funny and be social and like adapt to these completely different roles. And I remember like being in group discussions, being a Chinese, like growing up, we were not, we didn't learn in a group setting. We didn't, discuss the way I did in college. So yeah, I remember like being really stuck in that Chinese identity, being an international student, feeling that, I was always lacking something that others had. So when I started SoGal, I was intentionally making it more open, more inclusive, and less Asian, honestly, because it's very easy to start, I guess, like a Chinese entrepreneur, something like SoGal could have been that. And many of my, I guess, like friends would do that and kind of exclude themselves from the rest of the demographics. But I felt that it was very important for it to be international. And I remember thinking like there are very few Chinese or Asian women like thriving in the US that I could see. And I want to be that. I want to be someone that connects the dots. So after I started SoGal in LA, I actually moved to Singapore pretty quickly. I moved to Singapore at the end of 2015 and lived there for 5 years. And then I was thrown into another culture in Asia. And then I was in China for 10 months before I recently moved to Vancouver. So I've experienced like different identity shifts and how being an Asian woman means different things in different cultures. So it's been really interesting, and it definitely has shaped how I see businesses. And I think our struggles as either immigrants or international students, or, you know, being a third culture child or whatever, I think these things all form this kind of vulnerability, this kind of, you know, not so confident, like I wonder how people think of me. Like this actually can resonate with so many other kinds of vulnerabilities. For example, like being a woman, like being maybe like disabled, or being an LGBTQ person. Like I think we all share similar vulnerabilities, and I think that's a great strength that we can use to unite people and to connect with open hearts. So I think it creates, yeah, more hardship, but also more opportunities for us to build really authentic relationships, and to extend access, and to know that, you know, like there is privilege, and how can we, you know, enjoy, I guess, like how can we share things that we have with others with that experience, and like the vulnerability in mind. So I think that's been key in our success so far.
Yeah, the concept that you brought up, which is just the concept of unification, is incredibly powerful. And I think a lot of times, especially with everything that has happened in the social movements to date in the last couple of years, you always see like certain groups segmented out. And, you know, the most important thing is actually unifying different groups and relating to each other and building a sense of community through those vulnerabilities. Because I do think the concept of unification actually creates a lot more ability to drive positive change. And so as we think about positive change, just the last question, as this group thinks about the work that you've done to date, the positions that you are, and inspiring that next generation, how do you believe that women can help advance each other? And then the second part of it is, what is one really important lesson that you would share with aspiring women entrepreneurs in tech? And I'll start in the reverse this time. So I'll start with Pocket first.
So as an investor, we invest in a future that we all want to live in. And I think a big part of that is how can we redesign the world from different people's perspectives? Because whether it's healthcare or infrastructure, or how cities were built, or how laws were written, like these things didn't really have women's footprint like until very recently. So I think there is a huge opportunity for people that look different, think differently, to really step up and create their version of, you know, how things could be. So I really believe in the power of like for us, by us. And I think whether it's in food, or it's healthcare, or it's consumer brands, or technology, I think many people have made that move and say, like, you know, things have been built before, but they were not built for people like me. So now let me rewrite the, you know, what it could be, So that's what I really like as an investor. And I think for Asian women, we've still been like very silent, and there hasn't been a lot of, you know, uniting forces that bring up our collective emotions and struggles and challenges. So I really hope that we could really use our difference and the things we experienced to create something that could relate to other people, that could really benefit people's quality of life.
That's great. So I'll go to Kat. What is your advice for aspiring women entrepreneurs and people who may be thinking about joining this world?
Yeah, I think I would say find a community. I am, for example, right now, I'm working with a group of 30 women engineers, it's basically a series to help women engineers who are at big, like FANG tech companies think about working at startups. And I think it's also a Trojan horse to get them to think about starting their own startup. And at least a third of the group said, they want to work at a startup to see if it's the right path for them to start their own. And so, and the idea is like, exposing them to startups to, work with, but also to each other so that they can help create a cohort of women that can support each other through their like early, journeys. And personally in my own life, one of the things that has helped me the most, I'm part of a group of about 15 women, and it's women who are roughly at the same kind of career stage as I'm at, and it's been one of the most helpful things in the past 4 or 5 years that has helped me. It's just helped with my mental health and with my happiness, and finding a group of women who I feel like see me and can like provide me feedback when I need it. And so I would say, if you're earlier in your career, and look for peers that can help, as you all grow together. That's been one of the most powerful things. And I think with what you're building here, you are building that type of community. So that's really encouraging. It's like people won't have to necessarily form these like groups themselves. Hopefully they can come to you, to this group and get that kind of peer mentorship. So yeah, that's what I would say I would have sought out earlier, even in my career, is to, and I think at Y Combinator, we have these batches of startups. And one of the things that has, made it so that so many of them are successful is that they create these sort of peer support communities. It's founders helping each other as their companies grow. And it's a similar concept. So I'm excited to see more of that.
I'm also excited about the book club that you, Holly, and I have. I want to continue that for as long as we can. So to Sandra, because you are actively a CEO and founder today, you've gone through this journey yourself. What is that one piece of advice you would give aspiring young women?
It actually goes back to something that you had mentioned, Katie, which is this notion of dreaming big, being ambitious. I think sometimes, this is maybe a sweeping statement, but sometimes we're almost too pragmatic, I think, in terms of the aspiration or what it is that we think that we're going to be able to tackle. And I think sometimes it's wise and it's good to be disciplined and pragmatic in your approach. But I think in terms of your bigger vision and what you want to accomplish, I think setting something up that's big and hairy and audacious is a good thing. So I definitely encourage that.
I love that. And I think so much of it is just that if you don't see it in the world, go build it, go make it. That concept is, I find it, I've seen so many people be successful if they pursue that path. So to hand it off to Holly to bring it all home, going through the journey yourself, like what advice would you give aspiring women who are just starting off on their journey as well?
I thought going last would be less stressful. That's what I was on mute. I have to bring it all home. I think a little bit of kind of everything together in, when you're speaking, Pocket, about how things need to get rebuilt and reimagined, because for so long, women have just been left out. And so often you're going to be the only one in the room oftentimes because it was designed that way, sadly. In so many ways where you just even think about our education system, our political system. And the whole time I was thinking something's wrong with me versus maybe the system needs to be rebuilt. So in terms of probably what I would think is, don't discount yourself in terms of, and this is a lesson I have to keep on taking myself for this piece of advice. Is just really don't discount yourself, really encourage yourself to kind of just reimagine and kind of rethink. And I'll just leave you with this story, this conversation that I had with my daughter when she was 7. I asked her, I go, what are your plans to take over the world? And she said, oh, mommy, I don't want to take over the world. I don't have any such plans. And then I go, well, what is your plans to make the world a better place? And she goes, oh, mommy, I have lots of ideas. So I think if we just reimagine what ambition looked like imagine like all those ideas that would come out. Ambition isn't all about taking over the world. It's also leaving the world in a better place. So I just kind of want to leave everybody with that of just redefining what things mean and go build it.
I'm so inspired by that. Holly, you were amazing. It was a great way to bring it home. So I am so grateful and so thankful that each of you came and did this panel. And I truly, truly hope that those who are tuning in and watching, the snippets tonight are able to take away a lot of what I think each of you are trying to say, which is, at the end of the day, you are responsible for your own future, and you have an opportunity and a part to play in shaping the world around you in whatever that may be. And so something that I always share with a lot of people I've mentored over my career is that if not you, then who? So if you hold on to that and you dream a little bit bigger, I hope that we could all, as the panelists on this panel, as well as those tuning in, change the world and maybe make it a better place. So thank you so much for joining all of us, and I will hand it back off to our program.